Marisol woke before the first light of dawn touched the sky. She rose quietly from the narrow cot in the servants' quarters and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, steadying her breathing. The faint glow of a small oil lamp cast gentle shadows on the wooden walls. She could hear the soft snores of the other maids settling into the deep sleep left over from the day's work. But today she could not rest. Today was the day of the Beaumont family's oldest daughter's wedding, and Marisol felt the steady beat of excitement and nerves in her chest. She slipped from under the thin blanket and stretched, her arms overhead. Her shoulders, though slender, carried the years of careful polishing and sweeping. Marisol smoothed her nightdress and lifted her feet into the worn slippers by the bed. She padded to the small basin in the corner, splashed her face with cold water, and brushed her teeth from a chipped porcelain cup. Each motion was familiar, comforting. Each motion reminded her of the long mornings she had spent in this room for as many seasons as she could remember, when her hair was neatly tied back in a simple braid. Marisol put on the uniform, a plain gray dress with a white apron over it, spotless and ironed. She tied the strings at the back into a neat bow. Then she stood before the narrow mirror and smoothed her dark curls around her face, tucking stray strands behind her ears. Her reflection showed a young woman with kind brown eyes and a soft but determined expression. Before stepping out, Marisol took a deep breath. She thought of the day ahead. The great house would soon stir, with activity cooks would be lighting ovens, footmen would fetch carriages, and gardeners would arrange flowers in the long hall. Inside, her own duties would be to polish silver candlesticks, arrange crystal goblets on gleaming tables, and ensure that every glass sparkled in the bright morning sun. She felt a quiet pride in her work. Every item she touched was a small proof of her skill and care. Marisol slipped down the narrow hall and passed through a heavy door into the servants' wing. The corridor was cool and smelled faintly of fresh linen. A group of maids and footmen already gathered, murmuring greetings. Some faces looked sleepy, others ready for the busy day. She offered them a soft nod, and they returned a whisper of greeting. The head housekeeper, Miss Saunders, stood at the corridor's end with a small notepad checking names and assignments. Marisol felt her heart skip a beat when she saw her name on the list next to Silver Service and Great Hall. Good morning, Miss Saunders, Marisol said, her voice steady. The housekeeper gave a small smile. Good morning, Marisol. You know the routine. The dining room needs the best polish by 8 and the hall by 9. Then you'll move to the west wing for last-minute flower touches. Make sure you're prompt. Marisol inclined her head. Yes, ma'am. I'll be there. Miss Saunders' approval was important. Marisol remembered her first weeks on the job when the head housekeeper's word felt as weighty as any fortune. She had learned quickly, though, and over time had earned a quiet respect among the staff for her attention to detail. It's not that any servant expected praise from the Beaumonts themselves. Their world existed in the grand rooms upstairs, in whispered conversations and silent glances. Marisol had learned to find her own space in the rhythm of chores and whispered camaraderie with her fellow workers. She took a moment to breathe again, steadying her shoulders. Then she moved quickly toward the silver room, carrying a small tray. With cloths and polish, the silver room was a bright, narrow space with shelves stacked high with candelabras, trays, tea sets, and goblets. Each piece was framed by soft daylight coming through a tall window. Dust motes floated in the light. Marisol set down her tray carefully on a side table. Marisol lifted a silver candelabra and inspected it. Tiny spots of tarnish gleamed dimly in the morning sun. She applied a dab of polish to her soft cloth and began to work gently. Back and forth, making small circles, she coaxed the dull metal until it shone with a warm glow. The edges of the candelabra curved into graceful arms, each ending in a small cup for a candle. As she polished, she thought of how this piece would catch the flames of the candles during the evening reception. Casting dancing lights across the hall, her hands moved steadily. Years of practice had made her motions sure and even, she thought. Of her mother, who had also been a house servant in another family before Marisol was born. Her mother had taught her everything she knew, how to polish silver so that it shone without scratches, how to carry a tray without a single drop spilling, how to set a table so guests felt welcome. Marisol missed her mother's gentle voice. But she carried those lessons in her heart. As she finished the candelabra, Marisol laid it carefully back on the shelf. She wiped her hands on the edge of her apron, then chose a set of crystal goblets. She arranged them on a clean white cloth. On the polishing table, each goblet curved up to meet a thin rim of glass that shimmered like a drop of morning dew. She checked each stem for dust, then polished the bowls until they were as clear as water. The morning air was quiet, but Marisol could hear distant laughter from the kitchens as the cooks tasted soups and stews. The beat of footsteps in the corridor reminded her that the house was waking. She moved to the great hall next, balancing a tray of newly polished pieces and stepping into the long corridor. Portraits of Beaumont ancestors hung on the walls, their painted eyes seeming to watch the servants pass, as if in approval. When Marisol pushed open the grand double doors to the hall, she caught the first bright rays of sunlight. The room was long and high, with a polished wooden floor and tall windows draped with ivory curtains. The walls were decorated with pale blue and gold wallpaper, and a row of marble columns ran down each side. A long dining table stood in the center, draped in crisp white linen. Chairs carved from dark oak stood at each place. Marisol placed the tray on a small side table and knelt to check the legs of the dining table. She ran her hands along the carved wood, looking for dust or smudges. Then she set about arranging the candlesticks she had polished earlier. One by one, she placed them evenly along the table's length, making sure each was centered between the plates that Miss Saunders had already laid out. She took a step back, then leaned forward to adjust a single inch, making it perfect by now. The footman had placed the polished silver serving pieces on another table at the back of the hall. The silver lids and handles gleamed softly. Marisol straightened and took a moment to breathe. She felt the soft weight of her apron against her waist and the coolness of the marble floor under her shoes. She paused to look at the high ceiling, where a chandelier of crystal hung, waiting for the candles later. She imagined the hall filled with guests, women in silk gowns, men in tailored suits, the soft murmur of voices and the clink of glasses. It felt magical, like stepping into another world. Marisol felt a small smile on her lips. She loved these moments when her work helped create something beautiful. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Marisol turned and saw a young footman, his cap in hand. "Miss Jones," he said quietly, "the gardeners have brought the first flower arrangements. They are in the west wing. Miss Saunders wishes you to attend to them next." "Thank you." She rose and picked up her tray of unused cloths, ready to move on. Before leaving the hall, Marisol took one more look at her work. The hall was nearly ready. The light from the windows set the silver and glass aglow. Marisol felt a rush of satisfaction at the result of her early morning effort. She wondered if the bride would smile at the sight when she first entered. Perhaps Ellen would feel a moment of calm before the excitement of the ceremony. Marisol glanced back down the corridor toward the servants' quarters, where she would pause for a quick tea break before beginning on the flowers. She could hear voices now, a mixture of laughter and busy talk as other maids prepared the bride's linens in the kitchen. Staff arranged pastries and cakes. Her morning was just beginning, and though the work was never easy, Marisol found joy in each small task. Each polished candelabra, each gleaming goblet, was a reflection of her own steady care. With her tray in hand, Marisol stepped out of the great hall, ready to carry on. She felt the glow of dawn behind her and the promise of a special day ahead. The house stirred around her, but in her own calm way, Marisol moved forward, confident and proud to do her part in making the Beaumont wedding a day to remember. ChatGPT said. The late morning sun shone through the tall windows of the Beaumont mansion as Marisol carried a crate of fresh flowers down the long corridor. Her steps were light yet certain, guided by the smooth marble floor and the gentle echo of her shoes. Behind her, a pair of gardeners wheeled in more blossoms, white roses, soft pink peonies, and sprays of baby's breath. She set the crate on the cool stone ledge by the window, its pale light illuminating the petals like a soft glow.
Marisol
Knelt beside the crate, breathing in the sweet, heady scent of the blooms. She pressed her hands gently against the silk petals, feeling their delicate strength. As she worked, Marisol arranged each stem with careful thought. She cut the ends of the roses at a slant so they would drink up water easily. She held a long-stemmed peony between her fingers and trimmed away a broken leaf that might spoil its beauty. The white roses went into a tall vase, standing proud and straight. The peonies filled a lower bowl, their ruffled petals spilling over like pink silk. Sprigs of baby's breath wove through the flowers, adding a light, airy touch. Marisol stood, taking a step back to survey her work. The arrangement looked full and graceful, as if it had grown that way on its own. Nearby, the mansion's guests began to arrive. Marisol heard the soft clip of polished boots on stone steps, the shuffle of silk skirts across polished floors, and the quiet murmur of greetings. She could see through the open doorway a line of carriages waiting on the gravel drive outside. Well-dressed women in pastel gowns helped each other from the carriages, trailing long skirts that caught on the steps. Men in dark coats offered arms and smiles, tipping their hats to the ladies. The air was alive with polite chatter and the soft rustle of fine fabrics. Marisol turned her back to the gathering crowd and carried her flower arrangement into the great hall. The room shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished silver. She placed the vase on a side table near the guest chairs, making sure it caught the view of the long windows behind the bridal arch outside. She stepped back and nodded to herself, satisfied that the colors would lift the space. A footman passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, hurrying toward the reception room. Marisol offered him a polite nod. He returned it with a small smile and quick step. She moved to the next vase and began the same careful work. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. Each movement was practiced and precise. Marisol felt a soft warmth in her chest as she saw the hall transform under her care. She imagined the guests' faces turning to look at the flowers, appreciating the gentle tones that echoed the spring garden outside. For a moment, she let herself dream of being one of those guests, wearing a fine dress and chatting without fear of comment. But then she reminded herself of her place and the quiet pride she held in doing her work well. As she stepped away from the second vase, Marisol overheard a sharp laugh drifting in from the entrance hall. She paused, her heart catching. A cluster of guests stood near the doorway. One of them, a young woman dressed in pale blue satin, leaned forward to whisper something. Marisol recognized her as Cousin Beatrice, a distant relative of the Beaumonts on James's side. Seen Beatrice at many family occasions, always well turned out, her pale hair set in perfect curls and her laughter ringing like a clear bell. But she also bore a reputation for sharp words and sharper opinions. Marisol felt a sudden chill. She kept her back to the door, working on a final spray of baby's breath. But then Beatrice's voice cut through the soft music playing in the hall. "Look at her," she said, loud enough for Marisol to hear. "Just the lowly maid, thinking she belongs here." The words hung in the air, like a cold gust of wind. Marisol froze for a heartbeat, her hands rested against the stems of flowers as though she had lost the strength to move. The insult felt heavier than the crate she had carried. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. She could feel her cheeks flush with heat, then cool again. She wanted to speak, to tell Beatrice that her words were cruel and unfair, that Marisol's work mattered and her heart was as true as any gentlewoman's. But she did not turn around. Instead, she took a steadying breath and focused on the delicate petals before her. Her mind raced. She thought of her mother's voice teaching her early on, "Keep your head high and your heart strong, child. Let no one dim the light you carry." Those words echoed now, pushing the hurt aside. Marisol lifted her hands and continued arranging the flowers, her movements smooth and determined. She refused to let the snide remark steal her calm. Beatrice's laughter rang again, followed by a few polite titters from the small group. Marisol recognized some voices, well-meaning guests, who did not understand the weight of words. She could smell the faint scent of champagne on their breath, hear the rustling of silk as they shifted, waiting for the bride to appear. Marisol let their chatter drift past her like a breeze and turned her attention fully to the flowers in front of her. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. Marisol looked up to see the head housekeeper, Miss Saunders. Her eyes were kind but firm. "Marisol," she said softly, "they await the final touches on the register's table. Will you finish here and then go assist with the guest books?" Marisol inclined her head. Yes, ma'am. She wiped her palms gently on the edge of her apron and rose. She carried the vase carefully to the table by the registers where guests would sign their names. She set it down so the flowers faced outward, greeting each person as they approached. In that moment, Marisol felt a quiet strength settle in her chest. She reminded herself that her work was important. The flowers would brighten the hall and welcome guests into a place of celebration. Her hands had made that happen. She might be a servant by title, but her skill and care shone brighter than any insult. As guests began to move past her toward the seating area, Marisol straightened her uniform and caught a glimpse of her reflection in a polished silver tray. She saw a young woman standing tall, her head held high, her eyes steady. In that flash, she felt something shift. She realized that she belonged to this day as much as anyone. Her efforts, her dedication, her quiet pride were parts of the celebration's beauty. The bouquets for the bridesmaids waited on a small cart nearby. Marisol walked over and began preparing them, wrapping the stems in white ribbon, fluffing the blooms so they looked fresh and full. A bridesmaid came forward to take her bouquet. She smiled at Marisol and said, "Thank you, dear." "These are lovely." Marisol returned a smile. "You're welcome." The words felt like a small victory. As Marisol watched the bridesmaids move away with their flowers, she felt her heart lighten. She thought of the cousin's harsh words again, but this time they felt smaller. She reminded herself of the laughter she had brought to the room, the soft scent of flowers that would drift through the guests' memories long after the day was done. She reminded herself of her mother's lesson. A strong heart cannot be broken by careless tongues. In the moments before the ceremony began, Marisol tidied her station, wiped a stray fingerprint from a vase, and smoothed her apron one last time. She stood back and watched the hall fill with guests finding their seats. The bride waiting behind the arch, the groom's tall figure steady at the front. Marisol allowed herself a breath of relief. She had faced cruelty and moved forward with grace. She had turned pain into purpose. When the organ music began and the first chords echoed through the hall, Marisol slipped quietly away to fetch a fresh tray of water for the flowers. She laid it down gently beside the registrations table and then slipped into the shadows by the back door. She watched the ceremony unfold, her heart pounding with emotion not for herself, but for the promise of love that glowed between Ellen and James. In that moment, Marisol knew she had done her best work of the day. She had shown that true strength comes not from a title or a dress, but from the courage to stand tall when others try to push you down. And with that thought, she held her head high and let the music carry her forward into the rest of the day. Marisol stepped into the sunlit garden and paused for a moment to take in the sight. The lawn was smooth and green, cut just the day before. White chairs stood in neat rows on either side of a pale wooden arch, which was covered in wisteria and small white roses. Beyond the arch, tall hedges framed the space like a living wall. Small lanterns hung from tree branches, ready to glow when evening came. The air smelled of fresh grass, spring flowers, and the promise of something new. She carried the bride's train, a long fold of ivory silk, edged with lace. It flowed behind Ellen like a gentle stream. Ellen's face was serene as she stood before the groom, James, who looked handsome in his dark suit. His jacket was crisp, his tie straight, and his hair neatly combed. His brown eyes found Elon's with love and calm certainty. Marisol knelt behind them, making sure every fold of fabric lay perfectly. She felt the soft weight of the silk in her hands and the warmth of the sun on her back. The guests sat in silent rows. Some held programs, folded like small books, with the ceremony outline printed in elegant script. Others looked around at the flowers, the dappled sunlight, and the gentle breeze playing with the bride's veil. Marisol could hear the soft creak of the chairs on the grass and the distant hum of conversation that fell quiet as the minister approached. The minister, an older man with kind eyes and a gentle voice, lifted his hands in greeting. Gather. Today he began to celebrate the union of Ellen Beaumont and James Harris. They come before us to promise their lives to each other, to share joy and comfort, and to stand together in all seasons of life. His voice carried softly under the trees. Marisol watched Ellen's lips move as she nodded, her gaze fixed on James. Marisol's hands rested on the silk train, her fingers brushing the lace. She felt a gentle tension in the air, like waiting for a song's first note. Children sat near the front, their legs swinging as they tried to remain still. One little girl in a pale yellow dress pressed her nose to the aisle, her eyes wide with wonder. A boy in a tiny suit leaned forward, trying to see over the bride's gown. Marisol smiled at their excitement, remembering her own childhood fascination. With weddings, James spoke next. He reached for Ellen's hand and spoke softly, but clearly. Ellen, from the moment I met you, I knew you were kind, brave, and full of grace. I promise to honor you, to laugh with you, and to stand by you no matter what comes our way. His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes were firm with love. Ellen's cheeks flushed, and she squeezed his hand and returned. When it came time for Ellen's vows, Marisol barely heard the words. She was lost in the picture of the two of them under the arch, the sun making tiny sparks on the groom's cufflinks. She felt the silk of the train shift as the bride took a small step forward. The lace brushed her fingers, and she adjusted it with gentle care. Her heart felt full, like the moment held something wonderful for everyone there. Then she heard the sharp voice of Cousin Beatrice. Marisol froze. Beatrice stood near the back row, her pale gown a sharp contrast to the rich green of the garden. She leaned toward the man next to her and whispered something. Marisol could not make out the words at first, but the tone was clear, cruel, mocking, and loud enough to carry on the warm breeze. Marisol's breath caught. She felt a sudden chill in the bright morning air. Behind the bride and groom, the minister paused, waiting for Ellen's reply. James's smile faltered. Marisol dared to look up just a little. She saw Beatrice's lips curl into a mocking smile. As she turned to a small group of guests, they laughed softly, as though sharing a private joke. Her heart pounded. She knelt on the soft grass, every sound amplified in her ears. Birds chirped in the hedges. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead, but the sound of that cruel laughter rang louder than anything else. Marisol's hands shook as she straightened a fold in the train. She held her breath, hoping no one else would notice, but she knew it was too late. James's face went pale. He looked at Ellen with wide eyes, his voice catching as he spoke. Ellen, we cannot continue. The words felt sharp in the still air. The guests murmured in surprise. The minister's eyes widened behind his glasses. Marisol's stomach twisted. She felt tears prickle behind her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. Ellen's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to plead with James to go on. But then she closed it, her shoulders rising and falling quickly. She turned toward Marisol's side as though seeking comfort. Marisol looked up, and their eyes met for a fleeting second. Ellen's gaze held apology and sorrow. Marisol nodded, ever so slightly, as if to say she understood, and moved the train aside so Ellen could step forward. James took Ellen's hand and led her gently away from the arch. He stood beside her and faced the guests. I cannot promise my life to this family, he said, his voice steady now, when it shows such cruelty. The crowd fell silent. Some guests gasped. Others shifted in their seats. Even the minister looked taken aback. Beatrice's laughter died on her lips. Mar watched as James turned and walked down the aisle with Ellen. Their steps were sure, and the aisle seemed shorter than before, as though the distance between them and heartbreak was smaller than the hurt they had just witnessed. The guests parted silently. Some reached out to help Ellen with her gown. Others whispered among themselves, but the words were a soft murmur compared to Beatrice's jarring laughter. Mar remained on her knees. She felt the silk train slip from her fingers. She let it rest gently on the grass. Tears sprang to her eyes despite her best efforts. She caught the train's edge and folded it carefully, her fingers trembling. She pressed her lips together to stop them from trembling. She did not want to cry in front of everyone. Footmen hurried toward her, their faces full of concern. Miss Jones, one said quietly, are you all right? Marisol straightened and pressed a hand to her chest. Feeling the rapid beat of her heart, she met his gaze with calm eyes. Yes, she whispered, I'm fine. She had to be fine. They needed her to be fine. There was work to do, vases to move, chairs to clear, flowers to gather. But for a moment, she simply held the train. In her lap, feeling its silky warmth against her legs, she watched as James and Ellen reached the edge of the garden and paused under a small tree. James wrapped his arm around Ellen's shoulders. They stood close, as though sharing a secret. The minister followed them, and the guests slowly rose from their chairs, following like a gentle tide. Marisol wondered what the next steps would be. Would the ceremony continue elsewhere? Would they leave the gardens for the house? She could not tell. Beatrice sat frozen in her seat, her pale face as white as her dress. She stared at James and Ellen with wide eyes, as though she could not believe what she had done. The guests around her looked on with pity or confusion. A woman in a soft green dress patted Beatrice's hand, as though offering comfort. Saul felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. Justice had been done not by loud words or harsh actions, but by the simple act of refusing to accept cruelty. Marisol rose to her feet, folding the train and placing it carefully in her arms. The grass felt cool under her shoes, but she held the silk close to her heart. She would carry this moment with her always, the moment when kindness saved the day and cruelty met its match. She looked around at the scattered chairs, the fallen petals, and the guests gathering for what came next. The wedding had changed in minutes, but love had not lost its power. She stood still for a moment, letting the garden's beauty settle. Around her, the hedges glowed in the sunlight. The lanterns swayed slightly in the breeze. Somewhere a bird called out its song, as if celebrating a new beginning. Marisol felt a soft smile form on her lips. Even in the face of cruelty, something good had emerged. Ellen and James would remember this day not for the insult, but for the love that overcame it. With steady steps, Marisol followed the guests back toward the house, the folded train in her arms. Each step felt firm and sure. Knew the afternoon held much more work, but in her heart she carried a quiet light. She had helped deliver not just the bride's train, but a promise that kindness and respect rise above hurtful words. And with that promise, she would move forward, ready for whatever came next. James stood firm under the pale wooden arch, the morning light catching the edge of his crisp jacket as he faced the small crowd. He looked out over the guests, their faces a mix of surprise and confusion. Marisol held Ellen's folded train, close, standing a few paces away. Her heart beat fast, but she kept her gaze steady on the couple. She had never felt such gravity in a moment of her work. The garden felt quiet now, as though holding its breath. James raised his hand slightly to quiet the murmurs. His voice was calm but carried to every corner of the garden. I came here today to marry Ellen, he said, but I will not stand before any family that treats others with contempt. He turned to cousin Beatrice, who sat frozen in her chair, her pale expression betraying shock. Your words just now showed a cruelty that cannot stand. They cannot join a family that looks down on those who serve with respect and care. The words cut the air, clear and resolute. Ellen's eyes filled with tears. She reached for James's hand, and he held it gently. She lifted her chin and spoke softly, her voice trembling but strong. I love you, James, and I understand. I will not marry my cousin's harsh words. Gentle wind blew through the garden, rustling the blossoms above. Marisol felt the breeze on her face and closed her eyes for a moment. She let the victory of truth wash over her. James turned then to Marisol. His brown eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat time seemed to pause. He knelt on one knee in the soft grass before her, his hand still holding Ellen's. Marisol, he said, his voice warm and sincere, we would not be here in love without your grace today. You carried the bride's train with care and dignity when cruelty tried to cast a shadow. Thank you for showing strength and kindness. Marisol stood motionless, her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at him in surprise, her cheeks warming. Ellen moved beside James and placed a hand on his shoulder. She smiled at Marisol with gratitude. Yes, Ellen said. Thank you, Marisol. You have a heart of true beauty. Marisol felt her eyes prick with tears. She bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you, sir." "Thank you, ma'am." Her words were small, but they carried all the gratitude and relief she felt. The guests watched. In respectful silence, understanding that something precious had just been shared, one of the footmen stepped forward with a tray of iced water for James and Ellen. They each took a glass, their hands brushing. A few guests rose from their chairs and offered gentle applause. The applause was soft at first, then grew into a warm, supportive sound. Marisol felt the music of their approval in her chest. She realized she had never before felt so seen, so appreciated. She pressed her lips together to hold back a full smile, but relief shone in her eyes. Miss Saunders, the head housekeeper, came forward and placed a hand on Marisol's shoulder. "Well done," she said quietly. "You show all of us the power of dignity." Marisol nodded, feeling tears spill over. She blinked them away quickly and took a deep breath. Then she stepped back and allowed Miss Saunders to lead her away, preparing for the next tasks of the day. But her heart remained in the garden. James stood and offered his hand to Ellen. She took it, and together they walked down the aisle, followed by the minister and the guests. Marisol watched them pass, their steps sure and steady. She saw James stop for a moment to look back at her, gave a small nod of thanks. Then he turned to Ellen, and they continued toward the house. Marisol felt a tug in her chest as the garden emptiness swallowed the last of their presence. Once the guests had moved on, Marisol folded the train of the gown with care and placed it gently on a silver tray held by a footman. She made sure every crease looked soft and neat. Then she turned and made her way to the entrance of the house, following the other servants. The corridors inside were cool and dim after the bright sunshine outside. She could hear soft music playing, a piano melody drifting in from the drawing room. As she passed the grand staircase, a maid met her with a tray of sweet pastries. Marisol accepted one and offered a small nod. She took a bite of the almond cake, the sweetness calming her nerves. The day's tasks waited: tea for the guests, candles to relight, fresh linens for the bride. But for a moment, she allowed herself a soft smile. She had served her duty and witnessed a small triumph of kindness over contempt. In the drawing room, guests gathered around small tables, sipping tea and nibbling cakes. James and Ellen entered together, hand in hand. They were greeted with bright smiles and warm congratulations. Ellen's cheeks still sparkled with tears of happiness. James spoke to a few guests, and each time he passed by the table near the window, he caught Marisol's eye and gave her a small, grateful smile. She returned it with a polite nod, her heart full. After a while, Miss Saunders approached Marisol. "Marisol," she said, "the master and mistress wish to speak with you." Marisol straightened her back. She felt a small flutter of nerves, but also a quiet pride. She followed Miss Saunders to the library, a room lined with dark wooden shelves and soft red carpet. The Beaumonts waited there. Mr. Beaumont, with his silver hair and gentle voice, and Mrs. Beaumont, in a lavender silk dress, her hands folded in her lap. "Marisol," Mrs. Beaumont began, her tone kind, "we witnessed what happened today in the garden. We were appalled by such cruelty. We want you to know that we value your work and your character. You have served this family with excellence and respect, and we regret any hurt caused by others." Marisol's chest tightened. She bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am," she said softly. "I only did my work." Mr. Beaumont smiled kindly. "Your work and your heart are both remarkable. We'd like to reward you for your service today. Please accept this gift." He handed her a small velvet box. Marisol opened it with trembling fingers to find a gold locket inside, set with a tiny pearl. The locket was delicate and beautiful, a token she would never have dreamed of receiving. She looked up at Mrs. Beaumont. I don't know what to say." "We'll accept our thanks," Mrs. Beaumont replied, "and know that you are valued far beyond your duties." Marisol bowed again. "Thank you, ma'am. I will wear it always." She closed the box and placed it in the pocket of her apron, feeling the shape of it there, warm and reassuring. Leaving the library, Marisol returned to the drawing room. Ellen spotted her and hurried over. "Marisol," she said, "thank you again."
Got you again.
"Without you, I don't know what I would have done." Ellen's voice was soft, her eyes shining. Marisol felt tears pool at her own eyes. "You're welcome," she said. "I only did what felt right." Ellen reached out and squeezed Marisol's hand before moving back to James. Marisol watched them and felt a tender joy. The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant blur of music, laughter, and gentle conversation. Marisol moved among the guests, refilling teacups and offering sweet treats. Each time someone thanked her, she felt a soft glow in her chest. No one spoke of the cousin's cruel words again. Instead, guests spoke of the courage shown, of James's choice, and of the true meaning of respect. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, Marisol paused at the door. She looked back at the scene inside. The guests smiling, the couple surrounded by light. She felt a deep sense of peace. Her work that day had been more than polishing silver or arranging flowers. It had been standing for dignity and kindness. She had helped shape a moment that would be remembered forever. Marisol slipped away then, returning to the servants' wing for a quiet moment alone. She washed her hands and smoothed her uniform. She took the locket from her apron pocket and opened it to see the pearl gleam inside. She pressed it to her heart and whispered a quiet promise to herself: to always hold fast to grace, to treat every person with kindness, and to stand strong when faced with cruelty. The day's work was nearly done, but Marisol felt as though she had touched something larger than herself. She stepped out into the dusk-lit corridor. She carried with her the warmth of gratitude, the light of respect, and the promise that courage in any form could change lives. In that soft evening glow, she walked forward, ready for whatever came next. Marisol woke early the next morning before the sun slipped above the horizon. The hush of dawn still held the servants' wing in soft shadows, and the only sound was her own quiet footsteps on the cool wooden floor. She paused at the little window by the stairs and looked out to see the sky streaked with pale pink and gold. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the oaks, carrying the scent of dew and blooming flowers. Marisol drew in a deep breath and felt a steady calm settle in. Her chest? Today would be different. She dressed quickly in her gray uniform and fresh white apron, tying the strings at the back with practiced fingers. The golden locket James had given her the day before lay heavy and warm in her pocket. She slipped her hand inside to feel its smooth edges and smiled. It was more than a gift, it was a sign that her life was changing. Carefully, she pinned her hair into a loose braid, letting tendrils frame her face. Then she made her way downstairs. In the servants' hall, the usual clatter of breakfast preparations awaited her. The kitchen staff hummed quietly as they mixed batter for pancakes and brewed tea. Marisol carried a tray of clean cups and saucers, setting them on a long table for the morning meal. A few other maids nodded greetings, and Marisol returned them. With her own polite smile, she felt an undercurrent of excitement among the staff. Word of yesterday's events had spread, and everyone seemed to sense that something new was beginning. After breakfast, Miss Saunders called Marisol into her small office. The head housekeeper sat behind a neat desk, her expression both kind and businesslike.
"So?"
she said. "The family has asked me to speak with you." She held out a sealed envelope with the Beaumont family crest on the front. Marisol accepted it with curiosity. "This is from Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont," Miss Saunders explained softly. "They wish you to read it in private." Marisol nodded and folded the envelope carefully, then slipped it into her apron pocket. She rose and left the room, her heart fluttering like a small bird. She found a quiet corner in the back hallway, away from prying eyes, and broke the seal. Inside was a folded note written in neat script. "Dear Marisol, your dignity and kindness moved us all yesterday. We deeply regret that one of our own caused you pain. Please accept this small token of our gratitude and know you will always be welcome here, not merely as a maid, but as a cherished part of our household. If you ever seek a place of respect and community, our doors are open to you. With warmth and admiration, Charles and Eleanor Beaumont." Marisol's heart swelled. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the gentle beat of her heart beneath her uniform. She folded the note back, then returned to Miss Saunders' office to hand back the envelope. The head housekeeper gave her a warm smile. "They care for you more than you might know," she said. You may keep the letter if you like." Marisol found herself blinking back tears as she exited. She tucked the note into her apron pocket alongside the locket. Then she set to work. In the morning light, polishing silver and arranging fresh lilies in the entrance hall. Yet every sweep of her cloth reminded her of the Beaumont's kindness and James's gratitude. She felt a new confidence grow within her, one that came not from her work, but from being seen and valued. The day passed with the usual tasks: dusting chandeliers, straightening curtains, and preparing afternoon tea. Yet nothing felt quite ordinary. Every guest who walked through the doors greeted Marisol with warm smiles and nods of respect. A few even paused to thank her for her work the day before. One elderly lady in a navy dress tapped her cup gently and said, "You are truly special, dear. Never forget that." Marisol bowed her head, replying simply, "Thank you, ma'am." In the late afternoon, they prepared for a small gathering in the garden, a private celebration for Ellen and James. The soft glow of lanterns would fill the branches at dusk. Musicians would play a few cheerful tunes. Marisol arranged small bouquets on each table, choosing pale yellow roses and lavender sprigs that would catch the lantern light. She worked with a calm heart, each movement a reminder that beauty could rise even from hurt. As she placed the last vase, she heard footsteps. Behind her, turning, she saw James approaching. He wore a simple black jacket and a white shirt. No tie this time. His expression was gentle as he offered her a small smile. "Marisol," he said quietly, "would you join us at the celebration tonight? I cannot imagine the evening without you." Marisol felt her breath catch. She had expected to work in the shadows, serving tea and filling glasses, but she had not expected an invitation to stay as a guest. She straightened and met his gaze. "I would be honored, sir." James held out his hand, and Marisol took it. He led her across the lawn, where lanterns hung like soft stars above. Tables stood ready with lace cloths and silver trays of sweets. Ellen waited near the arbor, her eyes lighting up when she saw Marisol. "I'm so glad you're here, Ellen," said, stepping forward to take Marisol's hand in both of hers. "Last night you showed me what true courage looks like." Marisol felt tears prick her eyes, but she smiled instead. "You and James taught me more," she replied. "You taught me that love and respect can change everything." Ellen squeezed her hand and moved back to join the guests. Music began to drift through the garden, a soft violin melody that twined around the lantern light. Guests sipped wine and nibbled petit fours, chatting in low voices. Marisol found herself welcomed into conversations, asked about her family and her hopes for the future. At first she hesitated, unsure how to speak of herself beyond her work. But James stayed by her side, introducing her warmly. "Marisol is more than our head maid," he said. "She is a friend and, I hope, one day much more." Marisol's cheeks flushed, but she felt a thrill of joy. For so long, she had been seen only as a servant, but now she was seen as a person. She answered questions about her childhood in a nearby village, about how she learned to polish silver from her mother's gentle hands, and about her dream of one day owning a small cottage garden of her own. Guests leaned forward, fascinated by her stories and touched by her honest, soft-spoken manner. As dusk deepened, the lanterns glowed brighter, and the garden took on a magical air. Fireflies rose among the hedges, twinkling like tiny lanterns themselves. Marisol stood beside James as he took Ellen's hand to lead a small dance. The music slowed, and Ellen's gown swirled like moonlight. James glanced at Marisol and offered his arm. With a nervous laugh, she accepted. They danced in the soft glow, the grass cool beneath their feet. No one spoke of titles or rank. There was only the quiet harmony of the evening, the laughter of friends, the music weaving through the trees, and the sense of hope blossoming like the flowers around them. Marisol felt her heart open wide, filled with warmth she had never known. She realized that love and respect did not belong only to those of high birth. It belonged to anyone with the courage to stand for what was right. When the last note of the violin faded, Marisol stepped back, breathless and smiling. James offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted with graceful thanks. Around them, guests clinked glasses in a silent toast to Ellen and James. Marisol stole a glance at the couple and saw their eyes meet with affection and promise. Later, as the gathering wound down and guests departed under the moonlit sky, James found Marisol by the garden gate. He held out a simple wooden box tied with a ribbon. Marisol untied the ribbon and lifted the lid to find a small brochure and a letter inside. The brochure showed a modest house surrounded by flowers for sale in a neighboring village. The letter, in James's careful handwriting, read, "Dear Marisol, I want to build a life with someone of great heart and kindness. If you wish, let us begin with this humble home and grow our own garden, side by side. You have shown me that true nobility is found in the soul, not in a title. I hope you will choose to share your life and your dreams with me. Yours, James." Marisol's breath caught. Warm tears slid down her cheeks as she looked at James. He waited patiently, hope shining in his eyes. She closed the box gently and set it on the gate. Then she stepped forward and threw her arms around him. "Yes," she whispered, "I will share my life with you." His arms closed around her, the world around them a blur of lantern light and moonlit gardens. They stood together under the oak tree where the ceremony had almost faltered, now transformed into a place of new beginnings. Marisol felt the weight of her old life slip away, replaced by the promise of love and partnership. She realized that the courage she had worn like an apron had led her to this moment, where respect and kindness joined hands with hope and joy. As they walked hand in hand toward the cottage house she would soon call home, Marisol felt every petal beneath their feet, every lantern glow guiding their path. The night air held the scent of jasmine and promise, and in that soft, moonlit moment, Marisol knew that her story had only just begun, in that love, like a well-tended garden, would bloom more beautifully than she had ever dared to imagine.